This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview. It is another of my Actors on Acting series. Jill Dalton, a writer and actress, will be speaking with me, and the conversation begins when we return. Jill Dalton is my guest. She's an actress and writer. We will be talking not only about acting in this Actors on Acting show, but also some of her writing and how the two mesh together. As I usually like to do, I want to explore who Jill Dalton is, where she comes from. So welcome, Jill. Before we get into your family, I have to ask you, when I was looking up your name online, I found that there were a lot less Julia Daltons than there were Jill Daltons. So why do you use the stage name or middle name, whatever, Jill rather than Julia? It seems Julia seems a bit more stand out in terms of business.
Well, when I was little, okay, so my legal name is Julia, but my nickname was Jill because my mother was also Julia, so she was called
Ah,
Judy. My grandmother was Julia, so she was called Juliet. So, but I felt that Julia was such a big name. I was embarrassed by it when I was little. The
ah.
teacher would say, Julia Dalton, and I'd be like, Jill, Jill. So I was just always called Jill. So when I moved to New York City, and I guess I went up to um, AFTRA first, and I just listed myself as Jill Dalton. At that time, I wasn't thinking anything about, there cannot be any other actors by that name. If there are, that's why actors lots of times
Hmm.
change their names.
Yeah.
So I wasn't thinking anything about, there's no internet, there's no nothing. I'm not thinking about, oh, there's going to be too many Jill Daltons. I didn't realize there were so many Jill Daltons until there's tons of them. There's a sculptor, there's a
Yeah.
woman who has a TV show about organic food,
Mm,
and she's on YouTube and has
yeah.
a huge channel. And I was going to change it back to Julia Dalton and use that, but I spoke to an agent and he said to me, no, this is your name. This is what you've spent all these years building up. So if you change your name to Julia, it's not going to make any sense.
Yeah.
So what I did now on my website and also on my YouTube channel, which I just started, is I put
Yeah.
NYC
Yeah.
at the end of it because
Yeah.
I figured maybe I'm the only Jill Dalton in NYC. I don't know. But so, yeah.
Yeah, well, at least your name isn't Dan Schneider. There's a certain Dan Schneider who has ruined it for the name for the other Dan Schneiders. If you can, you probably can Google who I'm talking about. But
Okay, I
um,
will.
uh, so let's talk about your youth. Oftentimes, people who are artists or artistic come from families, and it's like being a lawyer or a firefighter or a cop or whatnot. Were you an outlier in your family, the only artistic one, the lonely, introverted one, or were you encouraged as a child? Was your mother a writer? Was your father a dancer or whatever?
My mother was very artistic, very creative, but she was a housewife. And only later in life did she take up her painting again. So, but she was very artistic. And my father was a colonel in the United States Army. So, but he loved musicals. He used to travel when we lived in DC and he was at the Pentagon. He used to travel to DC to go to musicals like Subways Are for Sleeping, and
Mm.
he would bring home the Cast album, and so I was exposed to it. I was never encouraged.
Mm.
My brother was very artistic, a great drawer. He was in advertising for several years. And my baby sister is very artistic as well. She's a tattoo artist.
Uh-huh.
And then my middle sister is also very artistic, but she's much more like a producer type, even though she produces like her home, her family. She was a private trainer for many years. So yeah, it's kind of a crazy mixture of things.
So, when you were young, was there a particular actress like Grace Kelly or Ingrid Bergman that you looked up onto the movie screen, or even in early television? Was there June Lockhart and Lassie or something that you said, "Oh, I want to do that"?
People have told me I look like June Lockhart.
Mm.
Um, for me, at first it was Natalie Wood because
Uh,
she was little,
yeah,
and I was like, oh, how does she? What? How do you
Miracle on
get to do
34th
that?
Street, right?
Yes, exactly. And I was like, well, if she can do it, how can I? How do I get to do that?
Hmm.
And this is funny. One time, my father went out west, I guess, and
Uh-huh.
I think I was about 10. And you know those newspapers that you can buy and you can put any headline you
Yeah,
want
yeah.
on it? So my father brought home a newspaper for me and a newspaper for my brother, and he gave me the newspaper, and it said Jill Dalton to star in Hollywood movie, and I thought it was real. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest news ever.
Uh-huh.
But then my brother's newspaper, Rick Dalton wanted dead or alive. So then I knew it was a hoax. And I was like, I was heartbroken.
Mhm.
But, when I was growing up, I always had so much energy. My mother put me in ballet classes. I wanted to do tap and baton twirling.
Mhm.
But my mother was like, oh, no, no, no. You're doing ballet. So I was always in dance class. I just loved theater. My grandmother took me when I was 5, actually, to she lived in Greensboro, North Carolina. So she took me to see Annie Gets Your Gun in Greensboro, North Carolina at the college there. And in the middle of the show, all I remember about the show, we were up in the balcony and I remember looking down, the actors came out on motorcycles.
Mm.
And it blew my mind. I was like, what is this? This is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. This is amazing. So I was just always drawn to the theater. And also growing up in the 50s and 60s, like I did, I mean, as a woman, as a young girl, you could be, I saw teachers, I saw librarians that were women, housewives, mothers, but my mother was not happy. So I knew I didn't want to be a housewife and a mother.
Mm.
She wasn't happy doing that. But she was great at it, but she wasn't. I think at one time she might have been, but after a while. So I knew I didn't want to be that. So there weren't many options. And then there was actors. And I thought, well, and Vivian Lee, I was in love with Vivian Lee. When I saw her in Streetcar,
Mm.
there were just certain actresses that, and I would watch all the black and white movies, All About Eve
Mhm.
and Stage Door,
Yeah.
and all these movies just thrilled me as a kid, and I wanted to be a part of it. I didn't know anything about Hollywood versus New York. I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything. And I just always was attracted to that. And then in high school, um, I was given the lead in this play called Teach Me How to Cry. Well, I didn't know how to cry. I didn't know, cry on cue. But when we actually did the performance, because I had so much, I guess, adrenaline, and I was so focused, I was just in that part and I just cried. I didn't even try. And after that experience, I was like, well, that was amazing. I don't know how I did that, but I thought that was amazing. And plus, people liked what I did. And so, I just was always attracted to it.
So when you watch movies, say with these actresses, were you drawn to the actors' performances, or was it a more holistic thing? Because you've done writing, so you've written for the stage, so you've been on both ends. Was it, oh, it's a King Vidor film, I've got to watch this, or was it, it's a Vivian Lee film, I've got to watch this?
No, it was the stories
Okay.
that had these women.
Mm.
I was attracted to
How about Ida Lupino? What was your thoughts on her? Because she was probably the only filmmaker of that era of your youth.
I didn't know anything about her.
No,
I didn't
okay.
know anything about filmmakers.
Oh, okay.
I just, I really didn't.
Mm.
I just, I like the stories that featured women doing things
Mm-hmm.
and having lives.
Okay. Let me just back up to your personal life. 'Cause it sounds like you did a lot of traveling with your family as when you were young. Did you travel outside of the U.S. to Europe? Or was it just where your father was stationed at the time?
Well, I was born in Tokyo, Japan,
Mm.
so I wasn't a U.S. citizen until I was 13.
Uh-huh.
My dad took me to be naturalized because he said, and I was like, I couldn't understand any of this. And he said, well, you have to be naturalized because if you're not, they can deport you in time of war. And I was like, what?
And you can never run for president.
And you could never run for president. Exactly. So, yeah, there was that. And then I went to high school, freshman, sophomore, junior year of high school. We were stationed in Germany, in Heidelberg, Germany, and then Nuremberg, Germany. And moving over there, because we moved in the summer. So when we got there in the summertime, I didn't know anybody. I just remember staying in my room basically the whole summer, just reading or I don't know what, and I was going to be a freshman in high school. And so when I went to my freshman year of high school, and we were in American schools, which were amazing, and the kids were amazing, and I loved it. And I was in the choir, and they had a theater department. The schools were very advanced and but I didn't care about, I remember I didn't study because I didn't care about it.
Yeah.
But I still passed. I still made okay grades. But I just, also, I didn't realize at the time that I was dyslexic.
Mm.
And so I had a difficult time with certain things. And when I was really little, first and second grade, I went to school in Louisiana. My father was stationed in Fort Polk, Louisiana. They did not teach me how to read. So then my father's transferred to Kansas, which had a really top-notch school system. I don't know if they still do. And I was in class one day, and I knew that you were supposed to move your eyes along from left to right. And so I would do that. But the teacher had us read a passage, and then she called on me, and she discovered that I couldn't read. So they put me in special ed class, I guess. So every day after school, I learned how to read so that by the time we transferred again to Washington, D.C., I was like in the higher part of my class.
And how old were you at this time?
Well, let's see, that would be fourth grade when we first went to DC.
So then you didn't start actually reading books until you were about 10.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting that you've
Yeah.
written plays and whatnot. Did you make up for that lost time when your teenage years by just devouring Ibsen or
Well, not when I was a teenager, but when I went to college, I decided to major in English because my father was now in South Carolina. University of South Carolina is where I went because he was being sent to Vietnam.
Mm.
And so my mother, I was the oldest. I had an older brother, but he had died when I was 4 and he was 6. So I became the oldest by default. So it was me. My brother was 3 years younger. And then my middle sister was like 8 years younger than me. And my baby sister was 13 years younger than me.
Mm-hmm.
So when my father went to Vietnam, I had to stay there and help.
Mm-hmm.
So I majored in English, and I took every single course they had with plays, American plays, Shakespeare, anything. I devoured them. And with Shakespeare, I couldn't understand it just reading it. It was too big for me. So I would check out the albums out of the library, and I would lay on my bed and play the album, and I would just close my eyes and listen to these great British actors, John Gielgud. I mean, all of them.
Mhm.
They all did the Shakespeare, and I would just lay there. So when I would and absorb it, and then my imagination could pick it up and make sense of it. So then when I would take the exams, it would just play like a movie in my mind. And they, they'd ask me a question, I'd be like, Act 5, Scene 2, because that's what they would do in the album, I guess. So that I made up for lost time in college. I just read every play, everything like that I could. And I did plays. I did a lot of plays.
Let me just then a couple of things that you mentioned. I just want to pick up on. So when you said your father was a great fan of theater and you were born in Japan, did he take you and the family to see the No and the Kabuki theater, and how did that influence you in any way, especially versus later American or Western theater?
Well, I mean, we left Japan when I was 18 months old,
Oh,
so
okay.
I never saw any of that over there, but I've always been fascinated by Kabuki. I was a mime for many years in South Carolina. I was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. I had a mime company called Homemade Mime.
Ah.
We toured throughout the Southeast and Puerto Rico. So I'd always been influenced by it, but not really realizing it, I
Now,
guess.
when you say mime, do you mean more vaudeville mime or more avant-garde like Mummenschans?
Not so much Mummenschanz, more like Shields and Yarnell.
Ah, okay, yeah. Yeah.
And
A
we did
blast from the
very
past.
well, and we were offered a national tour because we performed everywhere, and we were really good. And um, we had a classical pianist who worked with us, and he would improvise around us and play with whatever we were doing. But as soon as that happened, everything fell apart because it was myself, Eddie, who was the lead male mime, and then Patricia Claggett, who was the other female. And she was, very petite, short red hair, and I had long dark hair at the time. Um, so, yeah, so everything fell apart. Eddie decided that he wanted to be a ballet dancer.
Mm.
And when we went to perform in Louisville, Kentucky, we went to the ballet, I guess the ballet company there, and took classes because we were always taking ballet or whatever. We always stayed in shape that way. So we were taking a class, and I noticed that because Eddie was amazing, and he was beautiful, and he had a great body, and he could just do anything. And so she basically stole him away with, I don't know. And I said, Eddie, what? You're gonna start ballet at 28? Are you crazy? No, we've worked so hard. And he was like, see ya. And he just left. And I tried to replace him, but I couldn't find anybody. So that's when I decided, all right, I'm out of here. I'm moving to New York. Enough of this white-faced business. I'm out of here.
And what year was this?
Well, it took me a couple of years to get out of South Carolina. So the company split up in '76.
Okay.
I got married. You know how that is when you're young. So I got married, and then I was like, I don't think this was the smartest thing for me to do. Doesn't really fit in with my plans to move to New York and be an actress.
Uh-huh.
So
your husband at the time was not an artist himself.
no, I mean he was a guitar player and singer,
Uh-huh.
and he sounded just like James Taylor, and
Uh-huh.
and he was a songwriter, and he had sent his stuff in to James Taylor's manager, and the response was, I have James Taylor, I don't need you. And so he said, "Oh, I've got to go into the straight world." And so he did clothing stores, which had very hip, you know, clothing at the time, and he opened a bunch of them throughout South Carolina. And then his boss was stealing all the money, and so the boss went to prison. So the stores folded, and he went back to school, and you know, it was just a mess. So I said, I think this is my chance to get out of here. There's just too much going on, and it's not going my way. So, but I was still married, so I had to make a deal with my husband, and I said, I said, if I haven't made it in 6 months, I'll come home. And he said, okay, I'll give you 6 months. If you haven't made it in 6 months, you'll come home. And I said, yes. And I had a friend who had been in the theater department with me at the University of South Carolina, and she was coming up to New York, and she had found a studio apartment on 74th and Broadway in this pre-war building. And she said, oh, well, you can stay with me. And I was like, well, this is perfect. So I came up, you know, and it was a studio. I slept on the floor. She had she was subletting the apartment from a opera singer who was on tour. She slept in the single bed. You know, it was a tiny space, but the bathroom was palatial. The bathroom looked like it belonged in some, you know, 1930s movie with the black and white subway tile and
All Stars of 34 kind of movie.
yes. And then the entrance to the apartment, you had to go into the stairwell and get into the apartment. I mean, they must have cut this building up like every which way. So I lived there for 6 months, and I mean, I hit the ground running. I was just like every day. And then I'm like, oh, I need a headshot? How do I do that? I mean, I knew nothing.
Yeah.
So I would just like backstage. That was the actor's Bible at that time. It came out Thursday morning early. And if you didn't get there early enough, it'd be sold out. And you'd spend the whole day running from one newsstand to the next trying to get a copy of Backstage, because that had all the auditions in it.
Yeah.
And then I'd get backstage, I'd go back to the apartment, and I'd read it from cover to cover, and I'd circle anything that I was remotely right for. And then I got a job because I had a friend in South Carolina who had been a prima ballerina with the Washington D.C. Ballet, and she had given me the name of a guy who gave me a part-time job, and this is a crazy story. His company was, you know, those silver ingots that, like, if you look in the back, well, at that time, in the back of magazines, there were like ads. You could buy the tall ships.
Yeah.
And these little, he had pewter animals. So when I got there, he was like, I'm way behind on shipping things out. You can work as many hours as you want. You can come in on the weekends, have your, you know, whenever you get an audition, you can just go. And I'm like, this is the perfect job. So that's what I did. And I got, you know, because I'm from the military. So for me, you get in there, you do the job, you make it happen.
Yeah.
You don't think about it. So that's what I did. And pretty soon I realized I had caught up on everything, but we had no merchandise left. So I said to him, Lou, we need more merchandise. He's like, yeah. I'm like, Lou, no, I'm serious. Now this is monthly subscriptions, so people were still sending in their money every month.
Yeah.
Oh, and the other thing he did, he said to me, I'm going to make you a vice president. So when you sign the letters, sign, you know, Jill Dalton, vice president. Well, yes, I love that. A little power. So I had written to all these people, you know, I've got your stuff, it's in the mail, sorry for the delays. I really took my job seriously. But after there was no merchandise, and it kept month after month, and then I realized he was snorting, you know, he was very uptight, and his teeth would, I realized he was doing cocaine. So I'm like, oh my God, that's where the money's going. So I wrote to all his customers and I said to them, I told them what was going on. I didn't say he was doing cocaine. I just said, stop sending your money. We don't have any more merchandise. I don't know when we're going to get it in. And I'm not really a vice president. I'm an actor and I work here part time. Okay, so time passes. One day the buzzer, the front door buzzes, because everything's locked. It's on the east side in Sutton Place, which is a very hoity-toity area of Manhattan. And I go to the door and I buzz the buzzer, and in comes the FBI. And they put him in handcuffs and they take him out. They don't look at me. They don't ask me any questions. They completely ignore me. They take him and they leave. And there was only one other person that worked there, Paul. I think he was like a real vice president. And I said, Paul, what do we do? What do I do? And he goes, I have no idea. So I left. I never went back. I never heard anything from anybody ever again. I was never contacted by the FBI or by anybody else. But that was my first job in New York City, which was insane.
So before we pick up on your adventures and picking up your career, I just wanted to backtrack for a moment because you'd mentioned you had a brother who was older who died as a child. And I know when I write, there's a small well of maybe a dozen to 15 people who had a big impact on me, either good or bad, that I constantly go back to the well and sort of pluck them dry for little incidents or the way they looked at things or whatnot. And I know, having done 3 dozen or so actor interviews before you, that a number of actors do the same thing. Some don't. Have Given that your brother died young and he's evergreen, if you will, he could have been anything. Is he one of those people that you go to for not inspiration necessarily, but if there's some kind of emotion you're looking towards of incompleteness or emptiness, you go to him? And if so, what other people other than your young brother who died?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I always call on him um, because I did a few grieving mothers on Law and Order, and also, I've done a commercial where I had to cry a lot. So yes, he is one of the people that I draw on. And also I draw on my parents, because they're both gone. And yeah, they're all fair game. Whatever, because I'm so, deeply touched by them, that I'm able to access. Because I know a lot of actors can't cry, and that's okay. Everybody's different. So, but after a while, I didn't want to be a grieving mother anymore. I found it, it's a hard job. I'll put it that way. It's very emotionally taxing job, and because they shoot over and over and over and over and over and over again, and I had to teach myself by asking directors very specific questions about how the day was going to be shot, when I was going to be expected to cry, when was this going to happen, when was that going to happen, because in the beginning I didn't know that I was allowed to do that. I didn't even know that was an option for me, because you're on these big sets and they're big machines, and you are almost I don't want to say an afterthought, but there's so much going on. As an actor, you really need to know how to take care of yourself so that you can protect your instrument, conserve your energy, and give the best performance that you can to serve. I mean, it only helps them too, serve the work. But yeah, I use, and the plays that I've written, one of them was called Collateral Damage. It was a semifinalist at the Eugene O'Neill Playwrights Conference. And that was based on my family, my father leaving and going to Vietnam, and my mother's nervous breakdown, drinking herself into oblivion every night, burning her hands up, making beef fondue, hospitalized for 6 weeks, and just the collateral damage relates to not only the soldier who is really damaged by the war, but the families. Families are destroyed by wars. And I remember I met Colonel Ann Wright, who was one of the people who quit the military because of George Bush when he was going into Iraq, which had nothing to do with anything. And so she left the military because she couldn't put up with the lies and what was going on. She refused to be part of it. So I met her, and I told her, how much it meant to me that she had the courage to do that. And I said, I told her about Vietnam and my father, and I said, it really ruined our family. And she said that's what war does. It destroys families. And I was like, oh yeah, that is what it does. Because and especially Vietnam, because it was so polarizing in our country. And I was, 18 when my father left, and I went to the University of South Carolina, and I became radicalized, and I dated a rock and roll musician, and, my father was an asshole as far as I was concerned. He's on the wrong side. He's this, he's that, he's a bad guy. Yeah, and my brother grew his hair long and smoked dope. And, we were just like, I was dropping acid and going to my boyfriend's band opened for Janis Joplin. I mean, I was in it. I was just like, it's all about peace and love, man. Yeah. And these other people are just, So my father and I had a very rocky relationship for a very long time.
So just on a final personal note, from what you've said, it sounds like you never had children. Was that because of the collateral damage in your family?
I think so. I was married. My husband wanted children, but I felt like my husband was a child. And I felt like, well, I'm just going to be... I felt like I raised my baby sister because she was 13 years younger than me. And my mother was drinking. And so I felt like I'd had a child. I took care of her. And I just didn't want... I think it was a combination of things. I just didn't want to bring children into the world with a man who I felt wasn't capable of helping me raise them. He wasn't even working. I put him through law school. I mean, so, yeah.
So now let's get back to your timeline. You come up from South Carolina. You've got the 6 months to make it or not, a self-imposed deadline, I guess. Now, what was the first thing you got? Were you doing Nescafe commercials on TV, or were you doing voiceovers for radio? What?
No, all I knew about was theater, because I did theater in college and, throughout my life. So that's all I knew. So I would go into backstage and I would look at plays, who was auditioning, and right when I got up there, let's see, Theater Row was under construction. Some of it was already, some of those theaters were already running. And that was a way to revitalize the 42nd Street area and build theater community. And Equity was on strike. So I didn't have any unions. South Carolina doesn't believe in unions. We don't have unions down there.
Neither does Texas, where I am.
So I was allowed to audition. So I auditioned for anything I could, and I was cast in two plays on the exact same day. I was cast in Father Uxbridge Wants to Marry, which was a new play that was going to be done on Theater Row, and I was cast in the Ridiculous Theater Company. They were having a production. I didn't know anything about them, and I believed that I needed to be a serious actress. So I did Father Uxbridge Wants to Marry on Theater Row. It wasn't a great play, but it enabled me to, I thought this New York acting thing is a breeze, man.
Yeah.
I'm getting like, of course, I was also really young.
Now, when you say Theater Row, this is off Broadway because it sounds like Poverty Row, the B theater, film theaters, film companies of the 1930s and 40s. So this is off Broadway, right? Or is this Broadway?
It's off Broadway.
Off, okay.
Yeah, but it's all new. It's all to bring, theater, just to upgrade that whole area. It was a lot of money was put into all those theaters. They're still there today, but now they're off-Broadway houses.
And just so people know, Broadway is obviously Broadway. Off Broadway and off Broadway is the difference how many people it can hold?
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Okay.
Off Broadway has to be 99 seats or less.
Okay.
And then I forget what off Broadway is. Yeah, and then of course Broadway. So I did that play, and I realized as I was in that play, because all these other actors were much more veterans of New York acting.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I don't really have any acting technique. These people are like, they're like real act. I mean, I took acting in college, but our acting teachers, my training was just get up on stage and do the part. And I had enough, I could do it, but I didn't have any technique. So I thought, I need to take an acting class. Mm-hmm. And they all studied with Warren Robertson, who at the time was this guru in New York acting scene. He had a book called Dare to Act, I think was the name of it. So I got the book, and I was reading the book, and I'm on the subway, and the book says something like, you need to tear this page out of this book right now. And I was like, I can't do that. That's sacrilege. You don't tear pages. So I'm on the subway and I'm looking around and I keep reading it. So I ripped the page out of the book like that was, nobody even looked at me. I could have, nobody in New York, people don't care. Nobody looked at anything. So I went to the acting school, the Warren Robinson acting school. I couldn't get into his class because I needed to study with one of his devotees first, I guess. So I was in this class. I paid for a month. I remember it was $80. And at that time, that was like, are you kidding me? That's like more than my rent, I think, at that time. And I was like, okay, this is what I need to do. So I paid my $80 and I took the class. I'm in the first class. And it's horrible. He puts everybody in a circle. He puts somebody in the center of the circle. And we're supposed to say mean things to them to make them cry or something. And I'm like, this isn't acting. What is this? Psychodrama? I didn't know what it was. So I wasn't really participating. I was more like observing. So the next week, I left and I was, thank God. Thank God. So I went back the next week and he put me in the center. Because I guess he saw I was not participating. And he goaded all the actors to start saying really mean things to me, and it just built up, and I started crying. And so I left there, and I never went back. I said, I don't know what that was, but forget it. Mm-hmm. And I since then, of course, I studied with a lot of different people that didn't do any of that stuff. So I don't know, but the guy now, I looked him up, and I think he now is in Canada. He's torturing people up there, or maybe he's changed his tune,
Yeah.
or maybe I just didn't understand what was going on because I'd never seen anything like it.
Yeah. You know,
So,
when you mentioned that the tearing out the page, I think about 15, 20 years ago, there was an ex-convict who wrote a memoir called "Steal This Book." And
yes,
yeah, and so many people stole it that the publisher said change the damn title.
I remember that, the name of that book. I didn't, well, it makes sense that people would steal it. That's what it says. Steal this book. Yeah, tear this page up. I
Yeah.
was like, oh my God, okay. I
So,
can,
how long did you have to work in theater before you became a member of Equity and then later SAG-AFTRA? You know that, and Equity is for the stage, right?
yeah,
SAG-AFTRA.
goodies for the stage. Okay, so what I discovered is there's no money in theater. And I would do all these showcases and nobody would come. Just because they were like, well, you do the showcases because agents will see you and blah, blah, blah will see you. And I had done one showcase that my husband produced with my friend Dinah, who I had shared the studio apartment with when I first got here. And we did a production of Father Uxbridge Wants to Marry by Frank Giuliani, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. And it was great. And not Neil Simon, not Paul Simon. Who's the other Simon? The
John Simon.
John Simon, thank you, who was the scariest critic in all of New York. Everybody feared him.
Yeah.
But he came to see our production. And I was like, please, oh my gosh, please. So, but he gave us a great review in New York Magazine. And so I'm like, great, now let's keep this show going. And it was Dinah who had put up the money, and she just said, well, I don't really have the money to do that. And I was like, what? But, so what I decided to do, since there's not much going on in New York except theater, commercials, and I didn't really look commercial at that time. I was much more, with the hair and the Vivian Lee look and all this. Yeah. So I found out that you could get your AfterCard. Anybody could walk in and buy an AfterCard, and after let you go after the soaps. So I said, well, I'm going to be a soap opera girl. So I got my AfterCard. It was $300, which I took out a loan to get that card.
Yeah.
And paid it off probably $20 a month or something forever. But so I got my AfterCard, and then at that time you did postcards. So it would be your picture with your name and your number of your not your cell phone. What do we have? We had phone services. Yeah. So you'd send that out, and I'd say, hello. They wanted to know that you're doing something. So I'd say, I just finished this play, and I would love to work on your show, blah, 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 blah. So eventually I started getting extra work on the soaps, which led to Under Fives. Oh, the way I got my first Under Five on a soap was they created, it was called the Actors Information Project, AIP, and you would pay to meet casting directors, whatever. So I signed up for every soap person I could. And I auditioned for The Edge of Night. Mm-hmm. And after I finished my monologue, she was like, that was amazing. She just went on and on and on. So she called me the next day, and I did The Edge of Night, and I played a waitress in a little, when you think about how they do soaps, they're so like a cardboard cutout in a way. Yeah. So you had the one table where the two leads were, I guess, having their coffee or whatever, and then I was the waitress, and so I had a counter with some glasses and I think a towel. Well, I've only done theater. So I'm back there and I'm like, oh, well, I need action. So I'm cleaning the glasses and setting them up. And then the AD comes over to me and goes, excuse me, please do not do anything unless you're on camera. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'm from theater. I didn't realize that. She goes, yeah, when you're on camera, fine. But when you're back here, no. I said, okay. So my pager went off and I look and it's the casting director. And I'm thinking I'm in trouble. I'm thinking they must have told them that I don't know what I'm doing, that I'm back here polishing glasses. So at the break, I went into the lobby, and on the payphone, that's what we had pagers and payphones.
Yeah.
And I called her and I'm like, oh God. And she gets right on the phone and she goes, Jill, the director really likes you. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. And she said, yeah, I have a part for you. And I'm like, thinking, yes, now you're. So I said, okay. And she's talking to me and I'm already, counting my money and all that stuff. And she's talking and then she goes, oh, she said, it's a part of she's an ugly duckling, but then we're going to turn her into, she's going to become transformed into the beautiful swan or whatever. And I said, oh, that sounds perfect. I would love to do that. And then she goes, you know what? Wait a minute. On second thought, I don't think this is the right part for you. And I go, no, it is. It's the right part for me. Trust me. I would love to do that. And she said, no, let me keep looking and I'll find you something else. And I went, okay. And that was it.
Yeah.
And then The Edge of Night, went not too long after, well, maybe a couple of years after that, but I never heard from her again.
So this is the early 80s. So this is when soap operas were exploding with Luke and Laura and all that kind of stuff.
Yes. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, for me to get on a soap, I was like, and then I started doing day player work, which is more than 5. It's under 5 cents day player, and I would do that on like All My Children. I really started as an extra there. Mm-hmm. Then they did me a lot of under 5s, and then I started getting principal work on there.
And when you say under 5, what does that mean?
5 lines or less.
Oh, okay.
So a day player is,
yeah.
So
that's Susan Lucci, if you want, All My Children. She's the star.
Yes. So, which is a big deal. So I got this part, and I'm in a scene with Susan Lucci and her current boyfriend, our husband, in the show.
It changed every 3 weeks, so.
a new guy. So, the scene is it's like they're checking in at the airport. And I am in charge of, the tickets and all this stuff. So I'm at the counter, blah, blah, blah. So I've got my little computer or whatever it is that I'm doing. And I'm just supposed to interject my lines at certain points. But and they're having a fight, of course. Susan Lucci and the boyfriend are having a fight in the middle of this whole thing. So I realize the guy doesn't know his lines. He's making up lines. And my cues come off his lines. So I only know his. So I immediately said, okay, you got to wing it. So I would if he took a slight pause after one of his, I'd throw in my line and I just kept going. And then, okay, great. Now everyone go back to hair and makeup and we'll call you when we're ready to shoot. And I'm thinking, well, now that we're going to shoot, I'm sure he'll know his lines now. But he never knew his lines. I was sweating bullets. I was like, they're going to fire me because I'm a nobody. And he's one of the stars of the show, at least temporarily. And so I just kept winging it and throwing it in. And we're done. I'm so grateful. I'm headed back to my dressing room going, and I hear Jill Dalton, you're wanted back on set. Jill Dalton back on set. And I'm like, no, what did I do wrong? No. So I go back. something had gone wrong with the taping, so we had to do it again. But I mean, it's just, people think show business is so glamorous and so this, and maybe it is if you're a superstar, although it's, it's hard work. But for somebody that's just stepping in to a show like that's this huge thing that runs like a machine and you're just plopped in there. It's like being on a roller coaster and you hope you don't fall out of the car.
So, did you ever have that happen on stage where you had an actor who was forgetting their lines? It would seem to me that because soap operas, even back in the day, it's rush, 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 rush. We got to put out, 200 minutes worth of stuff a week. So you're basically doing an Ingmar Bergman movie a week kind of thing in terms of that amount of action. But if you're doing a stage play, you're doing the same thing night after night after night after night. And I've interviewed some people who said they worked with people who just couldn't remember it and they would have to prop them up. Did the actor, for example, that you were just talking about on All My Children, did he thank you for helping him? Or did it no?
Show business is such a class.
Yeah.
And I wasn't a regular on the show. I was a nobody in his eyes. I was just like a peon.
Yeah.
So, no, he never said anything. I'm sure he would never admit that he didn't know his lines. So, no. But I have been on stage with actors that, it's a challenge. Like I was doing this one play, One Shoe Off, and we were, where were we? We were doing it in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And I had to run on and off stage, 6 or 7 times and change my clothes every single time because my ex-boyfriend was coming for dinner and he was now a big Hollywood director. So I just wanted to look great for him. So the guy that's playing my husband says to me, he says, "Do you ever listen to what the audience is doing when you're changing your clothes?" I go, "No, why would I do that?" He goes, "Well, it's hilarious." I go, "Well, I don't want to do that." He goes, "Just take a listen." So I'm out there and I'm changing my clothes and I start listening to the audience and this woman's going, no, don't wear that. The other one looked better." Well, I went completely up on my lines. I didn't know where I was, who I was, what I was doing. Luckily, I got to run off stage to get another outfit, and it all came back to me. And then I came running back on. But I wanted to kill him or kill myself because why did you do that? Yeah, never do that. I mean, I don't have the capacity to be in 2 places at once like that. Some actors probably do. Obviously, he did. But I was like, oh my gosh, no. Yeah. And I've been on stage when I was doing my solo play, Lizzie Borden Live, and when I was first doing it down in Cape May, there were times when I would be completely up on my lines. I would have no idea what was next. But of course, the audience doesn't know that. So I would just stand there and I would breathe into my belly, a couple of deep breaths, and it would come back to me. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, one night, the place where I was performing, it was a church. So it was on, the stage was set up on the pulpit and everything. And nobody told me that they had removed the stained glass from the church and replaced it with clear glass. And so there's like a storm out and it's very windy, and I turn around and I look at this stained glass, what used to be a stained glass window, and the trees, like the silhouettes, the trees, it was like a horror movie. And I was like, what is going on? And I went completely, but I got it back. But I was like, I got the stage manager and I said, what, why didn't you tell me what is going on? He said, oh, I didn't know. I said, I want curtains up there. I want something up there. That was insane. So they put curtains up and it was fine. But yeah, anything can happen when you're doing live theater.
Jill, I wanted to talk a little bit about the writing dynamic versus the performing and how that may have helped you. But I wanted to start off by asking, I've often argued with scientists, and I've always taken the position that I think art is a greater pursuit than science. Science discovers what's out there, whereas art creates something and many times ex nihilo, out of nothing. Yes, you can have influences and whatnot, but the reason for saying that is I think science uses these little creative moments in service to discovering something, whereas art uses little moments of discovery to create something. Now, and one of the differences with one of the big sort of differences in the art, you have the performers, the dancers, the singers, the actors, versus the more creative side, which would be the writers or maybe the directors in film or even on stage. But since you've written plays, you've got both sort of sides. So how did your acting, which I presume came first, inform the way you write? Do you write more acting centric, or is it more the whole overall milieu of what you want to talk about? Like with Lizzie Borden, is it trying to get inside Lizzie Borden, or is it more an exploration of the world about Lizzie Borden?
Oh, that's a good one. With Lizzie Borden, because all I knew, I was commissioned to write that play about her, and all I knew about her was that nursery rhyme.
Yeah.
Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 30 whacks, that thing. So
Yeah.
when I was asked to write about her, I said, no, I don't think I want a homicidal maniac in my head. And the person said, well, why don't you think about it? So I said, you know what, I will. I'm going to do some research on Lizzie Borden, and I'll get back to you.
Mhm.
So I Googled some stuff, and I forgot about it. So a week later, the artistic director calls again. Gail Stallhuth was her name. And she goes, so what do you think? And I go, about what? She goes, Lizzie Borden, are you going to write it or not? So I went, oh, you're serious? She said, yeah, and I'll pay you, and you can be Lizzie. So, and we'll premiere it down here at Cape May in August of 2007. And I know Larry Hochman. I can get music for you, original music. And I said, okay. So for me, I kind of go from the inside out. I think because it was a real person that had lived in history. I read everything I could about her. And then there's I found online the transcript of her trial, which was 2,000 pages long. And I read it, not once, but twice. And then a friend of mine, Jack McCullough, who had directed my other solo plays that I had done, I called him and I said, would you want to direct this thing about Lizzie Borden if I write it? And he goes, Jill, I was born in Fall River, and that's where the murders happened, in Fall. So I said, oh, this is kismet. This is all meant to be. So he and I went to we would take road trips, and we would go to like 97 2nd Street, which is where the murders occurred, which was now a bed and breakfast. And we would meet the people that owned it, and they would give us tours, and we would talk to them, and they would talk to us. And then Maplecroft, that was no one was allowed in Maplecroft. Nobody had been in Maplecroft for decades. A man had bought it. He and his wife lived there. And this was the house that Lizzie bought after she was acquitted of the murders. And it was on what's called the Hill in Fall River. So my director and I drove up in front of Maplecroft, and we're sitting in the car, and I said, I'm getting out. So I get out. I start walking, and he comes out, and he goes, Jill, You can't just walk back there. That's trespassing. I go, what? What? So we're just standing in front of the house talking, and out comes a man. And he owns the house, and we meet him and talk to him, and he goes, would you like to come in? I'm like, yes. So we go inside the house, and that house told me everything about Lizzie Borden that I needed to know to write the play. It was like a fortress, and she had bought this home to protect herself from the townspeople and the rumors and whatever else. And it was a very nice place. I wouldn't say it was a palatial mansion, but it was, it was an amazing piece of art, actually. Had some stained glass windows. I mean, it was beautiful. He wouldn't let us go upstairs, which I was fine with that. And then I'm in the vestibule, and I point, and I look in there, and it's the dining room, and I go, is that the original wallpaper from Lizzie? And he goes, yeah. I said, can I look at it? Can I take a picture? He was like, sure. So it was like grapes, and so that gave me a sense of her as well, like her aesthetic and who she was. And it was like everything informed me. And so I kind of just went on the ride to see where she wanted to go and what she wanted me to know. And and just being in that house. Plus, I'm not physically like Lizzie at all. She was shorter, stouter, but that gave me a sense of how I could stand as her and how I could be like that and give the illusion. So the process for me is very organic, and also because I didn't have formal playwriting training. Now, since then, I've taken a lot of classes and studied with different playwrights and stuff, but I still do my own thing. But, I answer what is the dramatic question? It has to be answered with a yes or no, things like that are like guide me through. And plus, even though I wrote the play, every time I would perform it, my director was basically at every performance, and he'd say, I think we want to maybe change this. And I go, no, we're not changing anything. He goes, well, just think about it. And so then I'd sleep on it, and I'd get up the next day and go, you're right, we need to change. So the play kept evolving and growing. The more we learned about Lizzie, the more and then we became friends with the people at 92, what is it, 92, whatever it is.
92nd Street Y?
No, 92nd Street, where the murders took place.
Okay.
We became friends with the people there, and they had a group of players that every year would dress up as the different people in the Lizzie Borden story, and they would act it out. And so when we performed in Fall River and in Rhode Island, they came and they were our ushers. So they would be dressed in the garb, and they would be talking as these characters, and they would greet the audience. And so it was like a full experience, and it was a really amazing experience to do that play. I did it for like 3 years or so, and then I was like, enough of Lizzie Borden.
Yeah, it's interesting because you say that. I thought of two things. Number one, I had once written a play about Edna St. Vincent Millay. Now, she's an artist, so you don't have to visit where she was. Her words contain that universe. On the other hand, there's a fellow who did the Belle of Amherst on Emily Dickinson. So that's sort of midway between, because she's famously a little America's favorite nutty aunt or something. But she also had the writing, whereas Lizzie Borden didn't have any of that.
Well, she had what she said in the trial, which wasn't much. And I found quotes from her here and there. And whenever I could use the actual words from whomever, her father, her mother, I mean, who knows how actual they were, but
Yeah,
even from the transcript of the trial, whenever I could use actual words from people's mouths,
yeah,
I would use them because it helped.
yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned that you didn't, because I remember Lizzie Borden looks sort of like a German Hausfrau, what you think of them. Whereas I'm looking at your photo here, you look glamorous like Colleen Dewhurst in Anne of Green Gables in the photo there.
Yeah, well,
um,
I could probably look more like her now than I
yeah.
did back then.
Um, so regarding the question though of putting aside Lizzie Borden, but anything that you've written since, what insights or benefits do you think acting has helped you as a writer, especially since you're writing drama? It wouldn't be as important if you were writing a novella, or certainly writing poems, or writing a novel, whether it's a Dashiell Hammett kind of mystery or whether it's some science fiction. But since you're writing for the stage for characters, uh, how do you squeeze that lemon to get the lemonade?
Um, I have to say, all my years of reading all those plays and then taking acting classes for 150 years, reading all those plays, doing scenes from all the plays, acting gives you an insight into character, gives you an insight into people's feelings, and I just find it very organic. And I think it's just because I have years and years and years of being enmeshed in acting. And I tried a lot of different writers groups
Mhm.
where you read your material and you get feedback. I never had a good experience in a writers group, but I found an acting group, and I went in there as an actor, but I said, could I bring in some of my writing? And they were like, sure. So I would bring my writing in there, and because they were actors, they had such insight into the psyche, into just how you connect the dots in a piece. And I got great, great feedback from the actors, much more than from the writers.
Mm.
And I think it's because I do write from, it's all character driven. Um, yeah, and I was like, oh my gosh, I found, and I told them that. I said, I've been in so many writers groups, but it just didn't mesh for me. And maybe because I was coming from an actor's point of view.
Well, you mentioned you build from the interior outward, and that of course brings up the idea of method acting or just pretend. I've interviewed, as I mentioned, about 3 dozen or so actors, and some are were really intense in that method thing. I have to do if they were doing Lizzie Borden, I have to lay in her bed, I have to, I have, this kind of thing. Whereas a lot of them, there's the famous anecdote, I think it was Laurence Olivier said to Marlon,
Dustin Hoffman.
was the
In
one where he says that you're doing so much, boy, why don't you just act? Yeah,
Yeah,
that was Hoffman.
yeah. I think it was in Marathon Man where Dustin Hoffman didn't sleep the night before, the dental scene where he's going
Okay.
to do his teeth, and he came in and Olivier was like, "Why don't you try acting, my boy?" So, and I was trained when when I did training. A lot of it was method or part of the method or whatever. Which now that I'm older, I don't. I use parts of it, but very little. I use much more essential actions and as ifs. Use your imagination because I'm not going to torture myself anymore. I'm just not. And also, the method does not serve you if you're, I mean, maybe it does some people, but if I'm playing a judge and I have one line, what do I need the method for?
Yeah.
I don't need to get into my deep, so I don't need to write my history as no, no, no.
Yeah.
Just
You
need
know,
to say the words.
woman in right corner of restaurant is the role, and it's like, do we need to know you had a tragic, thing with an abortionist or something, you know.
No, and you know what? If actors want to do that, I say great. Whatever works is
Right.
my belief.
Yeah.
But I don't believe in torturing anymore. I think the method is kind of a bit of a torture thing.
So let me just talk a little bit, since you mentioned getting your actors union card, SAG-AFTRA card. So have you done also now, as you've gotten older? Do you do voiceovers? Have you done voices for games or cartoons, or voiceovers in commercials? Have you ever done voice acting?
I have. I used to do voices on the soaps because they knew me, so they bring me in to read a line, or they bring me in to say, in today's episode, the
Oh,
part of
okay.
so and so will be played by
Yeah.
so and so. But voice acting in New York is a whole different genre,
Hmm.
which is very competitive, which everything is in New York. So I thought about doing it, but I realized that that would be a whole other thing for me to go into and pursue. So I just never pursued it. I figured, hey, if somebody wants me to do it, I'll do it. And I thought about doing, Audible, reading the books. I said,
Hmm.
oh, but with my dyslexia, I can read my books. I don't think that I can sit in a studio and read other people's books aloud. I think I would struggle with that.
Uh-huh.
So to answer your question, I guess the answer would be no. Although I did some, but I never pursued it.
And you mentioned the difference between like superstar actors, the Denzel Washingtons and the Brad Pitts and the Scarlett Johanssons, those people, they live the lives of the rich and famous, as that old show would say. For someone who's quote unquote a working actor, how much of a boon or not has the union been? Because I know in the last few years there have been a lot of controversy. Medical insurance benefits were lost for some actors and whatnot. What is your take on the current state of the acting unions in the U.S.?
Well, I was very glad that the union went on strike. I feel that we should have been on strike years ago, but nobody had the courage
Yeah.
to do it. Every year we would lose more benefits, lose this, lose. I'm like, what? What is going on here? Everybody was so afraid, and a lot of the actors that were in charge uh, were producers as well.
Hmm.
So they had their own production company. Talk about a conflict.
Yeah.
So when you get a Fran Drescher who goes, "I've had my career. I'm not threatened by these guys. We're going to get what we." So I was glad. I think right now the whole industry is in flux.
Uh-huh.
If you look at film, I mean, we had Oppenheimer and Barbie,
Yeah.
which was amazing, but I think film is like diminishing in terms of the influence. When I was growing up, film was everything.
Yeah.
You watched the film, you went and you talked about it, you called your friends and you talked to them about it. You quote lines from films. It was a whole thing. And then we have streaming. But what's interesting is that what I discovered is that YouTube has more viewership than all the streaming platforms,
Yeah.
all the TV networks combined.
Hmm.
So things are changing. And I don't know what that means. In the industry, I don't think I'm not sure anybody knows what it means. I mean, Jerry Seinfeld, I just read his article in GQ that he just came out with, and he says, the movies are dead, but he's got a new movie coming out that he did.
Yeah.
But so I don't think anybody knows. I feel like, but I do feel people, well, what Jerry Seinfeld said was like, stand-up is booming because, I did stand-up comedy too for like 4.5 years. Stand-up is booming right now because people want something authentic.
Yeah.
That's what they're craving now.
Well,
and
well,
there's no artifice. You're on stage by yourself with a microphone,
right.
so you can't really hide.
Well,
Um,
speaking of artifice, I'd seen some videos about, for the last couple of years, people know about artificial intelligence, and after all the stuff about, they're going to make us like the Matrix or something, this kind of
yes,
nonsense. The
yes,
more real world thing, though, that artificial intelligence can have is in your industry. If someone, let's say, gets the rights to use the image of Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman, and they want to do a remake of Casablanca or something, well, they go to the States, they can get that. So you have artificial actors playing them. But then they may not even need background characters like you were in All My Children. That scene, they're just, oh, here's the cute brunette who's gonna be the cigarette girl. Here's Sam at the piano, and so artificial intelligence, if it gets too well, the producers might just do away with all but the brand name actors. Is that a worry for the union too?
I mean, I guess that could happen. I mean, right now, no,
No.
but from what I understand, it takes $1 million to create one of those um, artificial
Yeah.
characters. So it's way out of price right now, but that could change. We know how, like
Yeah.
when computers were gigantic and they cost you $1 million, and now, they're still expensive, but not like that. So I don't know that anybody knows about that either, and that was a big thing that everybody was freaking out about with the AI coming in and the producers. But also AI, you still need the human emotions. If you don't have the human emotions, you don't have a human soul. What are you connecting to? You're connecting to. I mean, when I can't watch anything like on YouTube. If I click on something and if it's an AI voice, I immediately get rid of it.
Yeah.
Anything that has AI, to me, it's like it's like a
Yeah.
robot. I don't know, huh? And you can tell them. At least I can. I can tell immediately that's AI. Get rid of it. Um, so I don't think anything can replace the human connection, just like nothing can replace theater. I mean, it's live in front of you. It's happening, and it's an experience. Um, but I mean, who knows?
Let
But
me just ask a general question, your opinion on the best kind of moments in acting. Now, obviously, you having done a little bit of soap work, there's always that scene where, someone's mother has breast cancer. She's got, 3 months to live, and there's the hand wringing. And these get sent around to the Emmy, for the Emmy reels for nomination and whatnot. But most of the actors that I knew, even before doing interviews like this, and I would say the majority of actors that I've interviewed would agree that the moments that really make an actor fine are not those award winning kind of tearjerker scenes. It's those little scenes in between those highs. How well do you bridge the emotional scene one and emotional scene two with the bridge scene? Do you think that too, that that's often an overlooked part of acting, those valley scenes versus the peaks that are written?
yeah, I mean, probably but I think it's just about being truthful. And if an actor is truthful, because the camera will just, oh, if you're lying, the camera just amplifies it. So I just look for someone that's being truthful. And yeah, the big scenes get a lot of attention, and lots of times they definitely should. Um, but it is the overall performance, I think, that, I don't really separate it out as this or that. To me, it's just being truthful in the moment.
Um, Also, there's sort of a paradox, or that acting, in a sense, is maybe the most personal of the art forms. Yes, you can write a personal poem. Yes, uh, you can paint a person, or a self-portrait, a great painter can paint something that's interesting about themselves. But with acting, you are that person, and in that moment, and you are slipping into the shoes of another person. But even though the acting is personal, it's also a very me-centric thing. You know, you're going to have you're there and you're exposed, especially if it's live and you're doing stage acting. You know, you're in that moment. You're just a minute away or two from the climax of the whole drama or whatnot. It just seems kind of paradoxical that it's the most personal art form, and yet it's right out there for everyone to see immediately. You know, a book will take X amount of weeks or months to get published. A film even is going to take, you know, could be 6 months between final shooting and being released or whatnot. But especially, let's say, on stage, it's right there. Do you have any thoughts on that, the personal versus how immediately into the faces of the audience it is?
No, I mean, as an actor, you just, you know, you can't, for me anyway, I don't concern myself with that. I just do the job, whatever the job is in terms of acting, what I need to do, and just show up and do the best I can do. And the rest of the stuff, you know, you have to leave it up to the powers that be. That's, you know, that's not my job.
Yeah.
You know.
On a personal level, what is the biggest sacrifice that you've made for your art? As something that you've thought maybe at some point, boy, maybe I shouldn't have gone down that road. I should have gone down road number 2.
Well, if I knew then what I know now, which I knew nothing then when I started, because I'm also very funny, and I would have gone the funny route. I would have not come to New York. I would have gone to Chicago, which has theater and comedy.
Second city.
Yes. And I would have done that route because that much more suits my personality instead of, because I had an idea of what acting was. Once you get into it, it's not that.
Yeah.
You know, so I would have definitely gone into a smaller market. But Chicago wasn't even doing that when I started. And Chicago, all I knew about the Windy City, I don't know anything. All I knew was New York and LA. New York was the closest. I knew Broadway. You know, that was my dream. I'm going to go to New York City and I'm going to be a Broadway actress. That was my big dream. I didn't realize that most plays are musicals, which, you know, and they want big stars. But okay. So I would have done, I believe I would have just done a whole different route.
Is that because, like, a lot of times there's biases actors have, you know, there's the big movie, then there's, you know, B movies, then there were made for TV movies at one point, and still are on, like, the Hallmark Channel. Then there was, you know, being a guest star or a star, or, you know, a guest star on a primetime TV show, and then there were the soap operas at the bottom. In that same way, was it because being an actor was more glamorous or more prestigious in your mind than being a comedian?
Yeah, well, I didn't know you could be a comedian. I mean, all I saw as comedians was like Phyllis Diller. I knew I didn't want to be like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I thought she was funny, but I was like, well, And then Joan Rivers was another type of female comedian who I didn't want to be like that either. So I didn't understand. I just didn't have any reference points. To me, I think a lot of it also, okay, I grew up, even though I traveled around the world in the military, my family was Southern wasps, and everything was buttoned up, and I believed I was supposed to be a good girl. I did a beauty pageant in the South, because that's what you do, until I realized, who wants to do a beauty pageant? I want to do this. But I had an idea of how I wanted to present myself in the world.
Yeah.
And the way that I was raised, like, no, we don't do tap, we do ballet, you know, and You say yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am.
So it sounds like you had a very hierarchical upbringing.
Yes, with the military. My father was an authoritarian,
Yeah,
and he ran our house like a military installation.
yeah,
You say yes, sir. You say no, sir.
yeah.
Line up. Did you pee? Did you pee? But okay, let's go. Let's go. Let's do this. Hey, hey. So I wanted to be the good girl. I wanted especially my father's approval. I just I didn't know that I could, go be funny and go. I just kind of stumbled my way through whatever was in front of me and tried to,
Yeah.
yeah.
So let me just ask finally then, 2 points then. What is your next project that you're doing? Is it an acting project? Is it a writing project? Is it a combination? And also, what do you look as your legacy as an actor? And do you have any advice for younger actors?
Oof, that's a lot. My gosh. What was the first part? I lost
What are you currently doing?
Okay,
An acting or writing part or both?
okay. Well, I'll preface that by saying during COVID, I've been writing, 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 right? But during COVID, there was nothing going on. So I wrote some short stories or essays, they're called, and I sent them out, and I got a lot of them published. They were all about, well, most of them were about show business, being in show business and crazy jobs I had in show business. And two literary agents read one of my stories, and they contacted me, and they said, okay, we want you to write a book. And I said, about what? They said, whatever you want. Just write a book. You have a great voice. We want to hear it. Blah, blah. So I said, okay. So I took a couple of years, and I wrote this book. And it was a memoir, which was all about my acting travels and stuff. And I sent it to them. And I said, okay, here's the book. And I really worked on it. And I thought it was really fun, funny, interesting. Could be a series, could be a lot of things. And you're supposed to give them 6 weeks, it said. So 6 weeks come and go, a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. So I finally was like, what's going on? So I sent them an email, and I'm like, I'm just curious if you've had a chance to look at the book or whatever. And so they wrote me back, and they said, we've gone back and forth, back and forth, back and forth about this, but we've decided not to move forward with the book. So I was heartbroken. I was like, oh my gosh, now what? So I put the book aside, and I said, well, let me let that percolate for a while and see what happens with that, what I want to do. And so I just, and in terms of acting, I have to confess, I don't enjoy acting anymore.
No.
I find it, I don't know, I think I just don't enjoy it. So I enjoy writing very much. So a couple of people had mentioned that I should start a YouTube channel.
Oh.
I was like, really? They said, yeah, tell your stories, whatever you want to do. So I started a YouTube channel, and I enjoyed it. I mean, I had never, I had to learn all this, because people were like, well, you have to have green screens, and you have to have stuff come in and stuff go out and stuff. And I was like, so I just started doing it. I enjoy doing that. And some ideas have come to me about the book, about a different way to maybe organize the book, start just as I'm on the train, coming into New York City. And then I can do flashbacks instead of starting much sooner when I was in college or whatever, going to a psychic who told me, you're surrounded by light. And I immediately thought, oh, Broadway, oh, Broadway. I gotta get to New York. So right now I'm just doing the YouTube, and for actors, in a way, I feel like it's a much better time for actors in a way, because you have the internet. You can study with any teachers you want on Zoom. Uh, it's just a different animal. And you can, all the auditions, not all the auditions, but most of the auditions are Zoom auditions. You can tape them, send them in. And because of Zoom, actors that would not be seen by certain casting directors are bringing new actors in, because they want to see people, and they just take a look. So I feel like in many ways it's a better atmosphere for actors, but in other ways it's not as personal, because you're not going into the office and meeting people.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that makes sense.
And just you don't have to give the specifics, but what was the reason that they turned down the original version of the memoir? Was it because it was too not what they expected, too discursive, or was it that they just wanted to know if you ever gave Paul Newman a blowjob? you know?
Yeah, they weren't specific. They really weren't specific. And then I found out, I mean, I knew going in, I had been working with a writing coach on the book, and she said to me, Jill, memoirs, unless you're famous or you've done something that nobody has ever done before, a memoir is a very hard sell for literary agents. And I was like, oh, please. So I said to her, well, maybe I should pretend like it's not a memoir. It's just a girl who wants to come to New York. Doesn't have to be me.
Yeah.
And she wouldn't. I don't know. She kind of wasn't very specific about that. So I don't know. I do think maybe it was because it was a memoir, and I guess it's hard to promote memoirs if you're if you're not a household name.
Well, the publishing industry is in the toilet. I mean, if you compare what's being published nowadays versus even 50 years ago, when you still had the remnants of people intellectually who were interested in things beyond just the mundane. But so I wouldn't take that personally as a swipe against your writing. It might be, if the idea is to get your stuff out there, a YouTube channel may be a way to, over a few years, grow interest in the book. And maybe you end up writing a one-woman play based on it that a younger actress could do well with. And there are all kinds of ways to get around that stuff. It's just I was just telling this with someone I spoke to a few weeks ago, that the arts in American consumerism and corporatism is just a monster that destroys art. That there is no art. It's just it's on YouTube. You're not an artist. You're a creator, and
Right.
and you'll have a 14-year-old girl giving makeup tips. She's a creator or an
Yeah.
influencer.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. The corporatizing of art, to me, that's one of the reasons why I don't want to act anymore,
Yeah.
is because I just can't take it. It's, it takes the joy out of it. There's so much pressure when you're on those sets. Like I did a guest star on FBI during COVID, and the director got in the car. The scene, one of the scenes took place in this car. So we're sitting in the car, and the director hops in the back with us, and he goes, "Oh my God, being on these shows that's a machine that runs, and you just got to get in and hold on and do the best you can."
Yeah.
And that made me feel so much better, because I thought maybe it's just me.
No.
Maybe I'm just feeling all this, but no, it's the way it operates now, and it's all, like you said, commercial, corporate. Everything is selling. That's another thing on YouTube I don't really like, is so much everybody's trying to sell you something.
And if you monetize your video every 3.5 minutes, you'll get a half a minute of commercials, and it'll not just be a 30-minute or 30-second commercial. It'll be 5, 6 second commercials.
Yeah, and you gotta be there and hit the,
Yeah,
skip button.
yeah.
But there's a few people that I watch on YouTube that I enjoy, and they've written books, and they're doing very well. But they have developed a channel over a number of years, and they have a lot of followers. So I just see YouTube. I'll just use it, and it'll evolve and change as I grow. And as I told my friends, who knows, in 3 years I'll be going, and so today, for 50% off, you can get this deal. Like, I said, but hopefully I won't be doing it.
Today's episode sponsored by Tampax tampons, the tampons that never quit.
Yes, and use my code that's listed below in the description for 5% off. All right, let's go. Yeah, I hope it doesn't come to that. But
well, anyway, it was a great conversation. I will link to your Jill Dalton NYC site below, also a couple of the other sites on there. So I just want to thank you and wish you good luck in the future as well, because it was a terrific conversation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I really had fun, and your questions, you're so knowledgeable, and I really appreciate your in-depth questions, and I appreciate what you're doing as well to keep art alive. And I'm amazed you found my channel.
Yeah, I think it was one of those things, literally, that it came up in a queue. If I'm doing work after my corporate job, I'll just put on, something, the highlights of the latest Yankees game or something, and then, things will play, and then I think you for some reason your channel came up, probably because I'm into the arts or whatnot, and I was like, oh, this is interesting, maybe I can interview her. So anyway, again, thank you and good luck in the future.
Thank you, Dan. Take care.